We are seeing the most divided Supreme Court nomination happening in the other chamber. We have not addressed the issue of separated families. There are still 500 children who have been separated and not reunited with their families. And yesterday on CNN, Senator Graham tried to blame that on Jeff Sessions, which I thought was really interesting because the Trump administration has continued to do absolutely nothing to actually try to reunite these children. And we on the Judiciary Committee have still not had an open hearing, any kind of assessment of what has been happening there. We've just had 2 tweets from the president attacking Jeff Sessions for allowing the Justice Department to continue to investigate corruption. And, Mr. Chairman, I just wish that we would utilize the Judiciary Committee for what it should be utilized, which is to address the significant issues that are at stake right now in this country around election security, around Russians interfering in our election. Senator Graham also did, by the way, draw some red lines that I wish my colleagues on the other side here in the committee would draw around not allowing for Robert Mueller to be fired, around not allowing for any kind of collusion, if that were to come to the forefront, to be accepted. I just don't think we've addressed any of those issues in a committee that has the authority, the scope, and indeed the responsibility to do so. I also wanted to say on this bill, I don't understand why we're debating this bill when we have so many things in front of us, but I am in opposition to this bill, which I see as another bill that is in search of a problem. It's a poorly disguised attempt to dismantle well-established procedural systems in the interest of advancing a corrupt system that sacrifices important environmental protections and maintains healthy competition among businesses. 5468 would severely limit judicial review of federal permitting of construction and real estate projects while making it more difficult to actually block the approval of those projects when they endanger the public or the environment. It drastically shortens the period of time for the public to file a claim from 6 years to 6 months. 6 months to file a claim. And that is a 92% reduction in time. It's an outrageous handout to corporations. And in particular, the bill undermines judicial review under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which was landmark legislation introduced by Washington State Senator, my state, Henry M. Jackson, in his words, to prevent or eliminate damage to the environment and the biosphere and stimulate the health and welfare of everyone. The bill requires careful consideration of the environmental effects of federal actions, and in cases where a proposed action presents those significant environmental consequences, agencies have to take into account an action's environmental, socioeconomic, and cumulative effect and impact. It's the smart thing to do and absolutely necessary for the health and well-being of all Americans. But instead, this bill requires courts to consider the environmental benefits, but not the harms of a permitted activity, in addition to the economic and environmental costs of any delay in undertaking the activity. That's preposterous. Supporters of this bill might as well just come out and tell the courts not to consider any harm to the environment whatsoever in reviewing these permits. Many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle were back home on the West Coast very recently, and I know many of you saw and experienced the devastating wildfires that are increasingly ravaging our states at unprecedented levels. These events are the latest in a long line of evidence, however much others on the other side might like to deny it, that climate change is indisputably real. And if you experience the unrelenting haze of smoke that many of our homes, my home in Seattle, were suffocated in for weeks, you would know, like I do, that it's not the time to undermine crucial environmental regulations. Further, the bill authorizes judges to impose a $5 million bond on litigants and makes it nearly impossible to regain those funds. So essentially, this places a $5 million fee on the ability to challenge a federal permit in court, which is unconscionable, and it puts public engagement out of reach, not just for the little guy, by the way, but for small businesses, for non-governmental organizations, and state and local governments. And in the case of small businesses, this brings up serious concerns about competition and the impact on consumers. So if we're serious about improving the federal permitting process, we should look at what we're doing to properly fund and support the NEPA process across all federal agencies, like supporting interagency involvement, especially with state and local partners, and encouraging civic engagement amongst our constituents. So I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I believe that the health of our people and our environment depends on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.